All right, so I'm still carving away on my stave, my longer one. Let's kind of show that. It's I've taken, it was about that wide, about like that, and I've squared this down. I've profiled it. Now it just kind of goes like this. I've just got to plane that down a little bit, but it's getting to where I can start to give it a bend, but it's a soft bend. This is not a bow. Sorry, I got a motorcycle. Neighbor's a rider. But anyways, this is not a bow that I would bend and fire green. Just something I've learned over the last few years in making these little short guys. If you get the right kind of wood, you can make a fairly decent bow that you can shoot right off the tree. Cut it, split it, shape it, tiller it, and you can shoot it. You will ruin it. I'm not saying you can make a green bow and it's going to be good to go for a year. If you take it and you just immediately start shooting arrow after arrow after arrow through it. But you can make a green bow out of some woods, and probably do some immediate hunting, but that's short term. I've talked about them in my other videos about a field expedient bow. I'm not going to call it a survival bow or whatever, just a field expedient bow. I have a friend who he had a quiver of arrows, and he couldn't afford a bow. I think he even made his own arrows just out of dowel rods from the hardware store. But he'd just take a willow sapling, cut it to whatever length, bend it, put a string on it, start shooting rabbits with it. So you can, and then he would discard it. So you can do it, but like that, it's a quickie bow, it's a temporary bow. Now I've made green bows, strung them, shot one arrow, maybe 2 or 3 arrows out of them, and then let them sit, and they were okay. I've also made bows, shot one arrow out of them, tillered them, everything, and they were a solid bow, but they kind of had a soft pull, so they didn't have a lot of snap. So yeah, they could probably kill a rabbit, but wasn't the best results. This is just too much wood that's too green. It's a little bit more mature. This thing doesn't have a lot of stiffness to it, and I can just tell it's got a lot of resistance, but if I pulled it, I know those fibers would collapse. So this is all that I'm going to do to this for a while. I'm probably put it in my car, park so that the sun will beat on it a few hours a day, and let this thing cure. But right now, I've got it pretty good. I'm just going to kind of do this again. I had to cut just a little tiny bit off, because after I got the bark off, which the bark on this was pretty thick, and it was thicker at the bottom. So that's one reason I went ahead and debarked it. If I was working on maple or just a little tiny sapling bow, I wouldn't worry about taking the bark off of it necessarily while I'm making it. Or if I'm like that, I don't really care. I'm going to let it dry. The bark will peel off on its own. I have a little maple bow in my car that I left there. I made it on the trail, left it there, and it'll shoot just fine. But in the middle, where the main flexion takes place, the bark just crumbles off like potato chips. But on these ones, on these bigger, sapling staves, the bark is a lot thicker at the bottom than it is the top. So if you're trying to just kind of do a bow out and you're eyeballing your thickness and stuff, that will throw you off, and you'll actually make your bottom limb too thin. So I go ahead and peel it off. It doesn't take very long to go ahead and do, especially on a bow that you're going to put some time into and try to get it to last a while. Go ahead and go through the whole process of it. I'm just like that. I've taken that much wood off of each side of this. I'm doing that while it's green, and it's still been a chore. I've used my tomahawk a bit, but I've done most of it with a K-bar. And then this last squaring up, I've used my Mora. And if I had my machete or a draw knife, it would have gone a lot faster. But I'm doing this just by right here. I have a spot where I marked the center. One mark was before I took that little bit of the end off where I had a knot. Right at the end, and it was wanting to split, so I cut it off before it did any damage. So then when I rebalanced my bow, it was an inch off. So I just use that as my thick spot, and I'll leave that thick because I can always come back into the handle to adjust that. But I'm planing this down now here from that spot that way, and then this spot that way, and then kind of starting to taper the ends just ever so slightly. But I'm not tapering them necessarily from the handle. I'm coming to about here and tapering them down. I'm not actually tapering it like on this bow. No, that's not it. This bow, where I tapered it basically from the handle down on each end. I'm tapering it from about, probably maybe a foot from the tips. I did want to mention that this bow, one reason this bow isn't as strong as it could have been is it was the end opposite this, is your bow will only be as strong as its weakest point. So when I first started flexing this and I first put a string on it, the weak point was right here. That's where most of the bending took place. So I left it alone from there, and I worked that way and I worked that way. And so that dictated the rest of this bow. And sometimes when you split one of these sapling bows, sometimes you'll get a thin spot, and that will mess your bow up. If you're trying to get a really powerful bow, you get a thin spot, and what could have been a 40-pound bow is now a 30-pound bow because you had to, adjust accordingly. But another way to do it is instead of splitting it, you just take a round stave and you just hack into the back end of it and go from that. And that's probably what I'm going to do with the maple bow I'm letting cure, is I'm probably going to hack into the back of that, and it'll be a different kind of bow. So I'll probably do a video on that too. But anyways, I'll keep doing videos on this just to kind of show the progress of this guy. I do have high hopes for this one, so I'm just going to what I'll do is I'll let it dry for a while, like a day or so, the rest of the day, part of tomorrow, and then I'll work on it a little bit, and I'll just work on it in stages from here on out. And by the end of the week or so, I should have a good bow to give a trial shoot.